Did you know Jagex used to have a rule against AFKing? If you got up to make a sandwich and didn't log out, you could be banned. But that's not even the weirdest rule I'm going to talk about today. Another rule nearly ruined the most useful resource used by RuneScape players probably ever, the RuneScape Wiki. The wiki started back in mid-2005, and just 6 or 7 months after its launch, it already had around 160 articles written up detailing a lot of the game. However, all of those articles were missing one thing: pictures. So, one of the wiki's editors reached out to Jagex through email to ask if he could put screenshots of the game on the wiki. For example, if the chicken page needed a picture of a chicken, he would screenshot the game, crop out the chicken, and upload that to the site. You might be wondering, why email in the first place? Why not just upload the pictures to the wiki? Well, you've probably already guessed by the title of this video, but there was a pretty weird rule stopping this editor. At the time, RuneScape fan sites were extremely popular, so Jagex drafted up a set of rules that they would all have to follow. Things like don't link to adult material, don't promote anything illegal, and weirdly, don't post any images of RuneScape except for the ones in this folder. Best of all, the folder didn't even have a single image of what RuneScape actually looked like. It was full of these weird 3D renders and RuneScape logos with different textures behind it. So, going back to that email, how did Jagex respond? Well, pretty much the exact same way I just said. The wiki could only use images from that folder. Now, because that's a pretty strange rule, even for copyright purposes, the wiki just decided to ignore it, and nothing bad happened. As far as I'm aware, Jagex never actually went after any of the sites using images that weren't allowed, and the rule was removed sometime in 2008. Kinda like how everyone is always trying to remove my gold in today's sponsor, Clash of Clans. Smooth, right? I actually used to play Clash all the time back in high school, until I got caught playing in class and wasn't allowed to anymore. I started playing again last year, and it's still as great as I remembered it. Clash of Clans is set in a fantasy-themed world, where you're the chief of a village. You build up your village using loot raided from other players' villages, resources you've produced, or with medals. It may sound complex, but it's super easy to learn, however, challenging to master. That's because you can tweak your base and army in so many ways. Someone else could have a near perfect base defense, but nothing is impossible with the right troops. Once you get started, I promise you'll never run out of stuff to do either. There's monthly challenges, clan wars, a second village, and so much more. Whether you're casual or sweaty, you'll have a lot of fun. So check out my link in the description below to download Clash of Clans for free. So, back on topic. That probably isn't even the worst rule that fan sites had to follow. Andrew Gower used to be so strict with cheating that not even quest guides were allowed. Here's a picture of what the tip.it fan site looked like back in 2001. In this screenshot, there's a little blurb about how Andrew Gower had asked tip.it to tone down their quest guides. Previously, the quest guides had given players a full step-by-step walkthrough of what to do. Pretty much exactly like today's wiki quest guides. Instead, now they had to mainly give hints on what to do. The full step-by-step walkthrough was, funnily enough, still available. It was just written in transparent text that you would have to highlight in order to see. Even though this weird quest guide rule was never added to the fan site rules page, tip.it continued to follow Andrew's request until around 2006. By then, there were plenty of other fan sites doing full quest walkthroughs with no problems. So I'm assuming Andrew just kind of forgot what he said to tip.it's staff by then. Then again, enforcing this rule across every fan site would pretty much be impossible. But Jagex is no stranger to making rules that they can't enforce. So just about everyone watching this video has used an AFK training method before. For those unaware, AFK stands for away from keyboard. A good example is fishing sharks. If you're like me, money, you start fishing sharks, stand up to do something else, and just check back in every few minutes. Well, back in 2006, believe it or not, this was against the rules.
Well, that's stupid.
In fact, AFK training was demonized so much by Jagex that they placed it under their macroing and use of bots or third-party software rule. That'd be like the DARE program going to war against Advil. If we scroll down to the section specifically about AFK training, this is exactly what it says. AFK training is away from keyboard training. While you are playing on our games, you must be at a computer. Away from keyboard training is not allowed, and you should log out when you leave the computer. Isn't that just kind of insane? AFK training is the only way I was able to max. It's probably the only reason that half of you can even tolerate your jobs. So why did Jagex take such a hard stance against it? Although they never provided any sort of official reasoning, my belief is that it was meant for people who took it to the extreme, like splashers. Splashing is the process of intentionally failing the same spell on a monster over and over by wearing equipment that drains your magic attack bonus. Each time the spell fails, you still gain XP for it, but why not just cast the spell normally and get more XP? It's because these players were able to stay in combat with the same monster by never killing it, and thus stayed logged in without having to pay attention. The game is supposed to log you out after 5 minutes of inactivity, but by remaining in combat, your character would always be considered active even if you hadn't clicked on anything in hours. Today, this only works for about 20 minutes if you don't click on something or move your camera, and at 6 hours, you get forced out of the game no matter what, no matter where you are. Thanks, Jagex. But back in the day, splashers only had to worry about that 6-hour timer. Before bed, you could log in, set up your account to splash, and get logged out a couple hours before you ever woke up. I've also seen a few posts claiming that the timer was actually 12 hours or even 24 at one point, but I couldn't find anything to back that up. At the end of the day, I don't think anyone ever actually got banned for this. Jagex really had no way of knowing if you were staring straight at your monitor the whole time or asleep in the other room. Even if someone did get banned, their posts on Reddit about it are likely hidden under a mountain of other people who claimed they got banned for AFKing when they were really botting. Something that so many try, even when most who do get publicly curb stomped by a Jmod. But let's talk about a weird rule that actually did get people banned. These days, if you are hopelessly addicted to RuneScape, like me, you play on more than one account at the same time. But for most of RuneScape's history, that wasn't allowed. You could have multiple accounts, they just couldn't be online at the same time, and they could never interact with each other, so no trading gold or items. This was a rule that Jagex actually enforced, at least back in Classic. So why did so many players do it, even though they knew they could be banned? Well, let me allow Lance Storm from the then popular blog World of RuneScape to explain it to you. Lance starts off his blog post devoted to the subject by suggesting that the United States nukes Bin Laden. This was written in 2001 if you couldn't tell. After assuring the reader that George W. will do something, he dives into the main subject. Players mainly used multiple accounts back then for a process known as muling. When Classic first started, banks could only hold coins, and PvP was on everywhere, unless you opted out of PvP entirely. Either way, you were carrying everything you owned at all times. Unless you're an Ultimate Iron Man who loves punishment, this was a very annoying way to play. So players would make a second account to hold all their valuables. This account was the mule. However, the game would also track your IP address, so you could only log in with one account per IP. If you tried to log in with a second account, it wouldn't let you. Workarounds existed, like logging into both accounts at the exact same time, but very few players knew about this. So transferring stuff to your mule often meant needing a trusted friend to middleman your items while you switched accounts. Oftentimes, this meant learning that your friend perhaps wasn't as trustworthy as you thought. Now, Lance goes on to say that once banks were updated to allow you to store items, mules became much less common. However, they didn't die out completely due to security concerns. pins. In Classic, there was no two-factor authentication or bank pins, so all a hacker would need to steal your whole bank was your password. If you were a high-profile player with lots of gold and items, having a backup mule wasn't a bad idea, but mules also came with a big downside. Jagex would randomly delete inactive accounts if they didn't have much progress to try and save space. So you would need to spend time actually training your mule here and there. As far as I could find, Jagex only really seemed to enforce this rule in Classic, and when they did, it wasn't often. In fact, it might have only been before you could store items. There's a ton of posts by RuneScape 2 players who even went as far as playing on 4 accounts, trading gold between them, and never getting banned. But the reason this rule made the video was because of the 1 account per IP lock. I don't know about you, but I have a sibling who played RuneScape 2. We were lucky enough to have 2 computers in the house, so we never had to take turns playing, but I can only imagine how annoying it would have been having to on Classic. It could be worse though. Imagine trying to play at school or the library. Now, those of you who have been playing for a while may remember when the website had ads on it, something that I'm now weirdly sort of nostalgic for. There's nothing more early 2000s than a banner ad with flashing colors telling you that you just won life-changing wealth at 9 years old. Anyway, Jagex removed them from the website a couple years back because they weren't really earning as much as they used to, and as you could see, could be pretty sketchy. Things like RuneScape memberships, RS3 microtransactions, and bonds are really what pay the bills. But back in the day, ads were actually pretty important because they paid for the game's free-to-play servers. They were so important that if you weren't a member, you'd even get an ad above the game window. That ad spot specifically would actually cause me to break the game rules hundreds of times over the next few years without even realizing it. If you haven't guessed already, Jagex added a rule against free-to-play players blocking ads back in early 2006. Now, the rule itself isn't dumb. It makes sense why Jagex added it. The reason it's in this video is because it couldn't be enforced. I used to play RuneScape in the browser for years, and every single time I would right-click the ad and use inspect element to hide it. Not only did I never get banned for it, that same account is now a player moderator. But you might be wondering why this rule was added in 2006 rather than much earlier. It's probably because of an old third-party RuneScape client called SwiftSwitch, and when Andrew Gower found out that it was blocking ads, he was 10 times more upset than when he saw Tip.id's quest guides. I actually have a whole video about that situation on the right-hand side of the screen.